introduce our guest speaker. He's no stranger, Mr. Peter. Good evening. Yes, my name is Peter Levitt, and thank you for everybody coming. I would like to give to you a brief account of Thanksgiving back to the time of the Pilgrims. And I'm dressed up, as most of you already know, usually as a Minuteman from the American Revolution, and I often think about what did this group of people during America's founding, as in the United States of America, who did they look back to? Where did that Christian foundation come from? So again, this is a little summary of Thanksgiving. So stepping back into the early years of 1600, through 1600 to 1620, there's a group of Puritans and separatists in England. See, at this time, government was organized with the church. They were together. The Puritans felt that they wanted to help change the English church back to how it was, to make it more pure. The term Puritan actually was derogatory to them. It was meant more so sarcastically. There's another group from the Church of England that were called the Separatists. The Separatists did not see that they were fit to be involved with the Church of England any longer, and thus they separated from the church. But they did things differently, where they would have a pastor, elders, and deacons that solely focused on that group of people. But they were no longer associated with the Church of England. Of course, there is persecution from the crown, and this was something that they saw that they could no longer deal with. They moved around several times, once into the Netherlands, where they hoped to have peace, but they just did not see things fit there for them either. So some familiar names of William Bradford, John Robinson, Elder William Brewster, and John Carver, amongst others, were some of these men there. So John Robinson, their pastor, felt that there was a need that they needed to move elsewhere, perhaps to the new land in America. Of course, at this time, charters and funding was of great hardships to do, but it was something they started to heavily look into. But where would they go in America? They thought more than likely to the Virginia colony, the Virginia Charter, despite hearing the stories of Jamestown, which if you ever have your time to look into Jamestown, there's many interesting stories of Jamestown, all the way to the point that cannibalism took place in Jamestown and numerous Indian attacks. So despite those things, they felt the need that they must move from England. So would it be there or South America? They felt not South America because there's a great Spanish control in South America. So they had to find funds. They came across funds and were able to have the Speedwell, which was a ship, and the Mayflower were both successfully funded for this voyage of roughly 102 people. But originally, there was more people that were going to come over on that first voyage. They left Southampton on August the 5th of 1620 with both ships. Left several miles out, a couple days out, all of a sudden the ship, the Speedwell, started to have issues. Turned around, got repairs done. Left a second time, more problems on the same ship, turned back around, back to England, had more repairs done until the point they decided they were not going to use the Speedwell. It was no longer seaworthy. And thus this was a great testing of some of the souls that make this voyage. Some people, just to tell you, in honesty, did not have the heart for this voyage and hardship that would be coming with this group of people. Thus, they stayed in England as well. So it was only the Mayflower, with roughly 102 people, that started their cross or on their trip to the Atlantic, through the Atlantic to America. But now, this whole time, it has put them several weeks or a couple months back, so now they'll be getting to America sometime in November, in the beginning of winter, which they did not want to do, because now you'll be getting there at a very hard time in America. So on the ship, it's roughly 7 weeks at sea, in a well-crowded below-deck area of roughly 102 people. More people than what's gathered in here in a smaller space than what the sanctuary is. Sickness and all kinds of other troubles that you can imagine and smells were all present on the ship. And there are accounts in some of the storms that the lantern I use this book, for instance, that the lantern would sway back and forth so much that it would become almost parallel to the floor in that voyage across the Atlantic. Well, there is a sailor who started to make fun of the separatists, but now we will call them Pilgrims, started to make fun of them, and in his own words, he said in his harassment that he was waiting for these landlubbers to die and then feed them to the fish. All of a sudden, a terrible illness fell upon him, a fever that nobody knew what it was, and in the same day, he died of this fever. He was the first one to die on the voyage. Despite his harassment, he was actually the first one to die. There's another man who died, but it was a lack of eating the lemon juice and lemons, and more than likely died from scurvy. So, later on, November the 9th, which they went by a different calendar, so that would actually be November the 19th in our calendar, yesterday, it was land ho that they found land. But it was not where they thought that it would be. They were roughly 400 miles north, ended up in Cape Cod, way up there. So, of course, some of the men immediately went out and got on the ground and gave thanks to the Lord of making it this far. But now it's in November. It's cold, the winds are strong, snow, and just a terrible winter with having already very little food on the ship. So they had Indian encounters, there were some Indian attacks and everything, but most of the time they stayed on the ship while they were trying to find things on shore. But when they first got there, they came across this strange mound of sand with some other items on top of it, and it had baskets filled with corn buried under the sand. So they got these baskets and brought them back to the ship, which they were able to use that first winter with finding some other things. And they had the full intentions of thanking the Indians who left it there. That they met. So they met Samoset and Squanto. Of course, there's a whole lot more, but these Indians helped them. Specifically, Squanto was staying with the Pilgrims in that summer of 1621, was showing them how to plant, how to harvest, how to hunt, and all these different things that were new to them. And thus they gave a great thanksgiving to the Lord because of all the blessings that the Lord has bestowed upon them. Unfortunately, the first governor, John Carver, died, but William Bradford declared a day of thanksgiving to be held in October. From what I researched, there is no exact date of when this took place, but it was believed to be in the month of October. So Chief Massasoit arrives with about 90 braves, and they thought, what were they going to do about food? They didn't have hardly any food to feed not only themselves for that coming winter, but also for all these Indians. Well, they brought their own food with them, and thus they had a great Thanksgiving together. They had shooting, games, and wrestling, and racing, and all kinds of things took place that day. But let me tell you, just to stop there, when the Pilgrims first came, because they landed so far away, they were out of the original charter that was agreed upon. And they realized that being out of the jurisdiction given from the crown, that there could very well be a mutiny to take place because there's other strangers on their ship that weren't necessarily separatists. So to read this, just going back to when they first got on the land, this is the Mayflower Compact. It's rather short. This was written, let's see, it'd be this November the 11th of 1620. In the name of God, Amen. We whose names are underwritten, the loyal subjects of our dread sovereign Lord King James, by the grace of God, of Great Britain, France and Ireland, King Defender of the Faith, etc., have undertaken for the glory of God and the advancement of the Christian faith, in honor of our King and country, a voyage to plant the first colony in the northern parts of Virginia, do by these presents, solemnly and mutually in the presence of God and of one another, covenant and combine ourselves together into a civil body politic, for our better ordering, and preservation and furtherance of the ends aforesaid, and by virtue hereof to enact, constitute, and frame just and equal laws, ordinances, acts, and constitutions, and offices from time to time, as shall be thought most meet and convenient for the general good of the colony, unto which we promise all due submission and obedience. In witness thereof, we have hereunto subscribed our names at Cape Cod, the 11th of November, in the year of our reign and sovereign Lord, King James of England, France, Ireland, the 18th, and of Scotland, the 54th, Anno Domini, 1620. So that would be the Mayflower Compact. So they had this first Thanksgiving. And of course, all of a sudden, there were some newcomers that arrived on a ship called the Fortune. Roughly 35 newcomers. On the ship, though, they had no food and no equipment. So now it became very real to them of being reminded of those starving times that took place in Jamestown. What were they going to do? They already had their rations for the people that were already there. So they went to half rations. Later on in that winter, it was a very hard thing for them to do, but they were able to get through that winter. But coming forward into the next years, they had this experience in this same winter that there was a new starving time, and they had the choice of going to 5 kernels of corn per person. So I'd like to give you this, one for each side, if you just pass it down. So you have the realization. I'll pass it down here, maybe you can pass it on to the next pew. So there's your rations for a day. 5 kernels of corn, and to say that the Indian corn at that time would be actually much smaller than those kernels. So, fortunately, they made it through the winter without having anyone die. For this reason, you could take this hardship and be tormented in dismay and misery and anxiety, or, as they did, they just fully trusted in the Lord and took this as such a fashion that they are being hammered out just like a sword in the furnace for God's purpose. And by miraculous intervention, nobody died in that winter of 1621 to 1622. Summer of 1623 came along with a terrible drought. A lot of the corn started to fail, a lot of the beans, and just a terrible, terrible drought. So the governor there, he called William Bradford for a day of fasting and prayer. And he declared it, that all other appointments are to be set aside. So a day dedicated to the Lord with absolutely no work except prayer. The following day, there was this great rain that came down, and it was gentle enough where it didn't harm their crops. But it rained for roughly 14 days. And it astonished the Pilgrims and the Indians, because the Indians, even the Indians of old, said they saw nothing like this drought, and that their rain dances weren't working. Sort of like stories in the Old Testament of how you had the sorcerers doing their tricks and things, and Moses and his staff turned into a snake, and just a very interesting thing. But it took the Indians very much so by the heart, because they started to know the Pilgrims' God. So in that same year, 1623, they had a second Thanksgiving with Chief Massasoit and 120 braves with even more food. Emmanuel Alpham notes of the day that it was, he notes that the day, a better country was never seen nor heard of, for here are a multitude of God and his blessings. And the first course of the meal that the Pilgrims had, as you just saw in this plate, was 5 kernels of corn, was their first course of the meal. And they took a moment to remember from that first Thanksgiving of what all the Lord did for them. William Bradford said this, and he was the governor of the colony at this time: as one small candle can light 1,000, So the light kindled here has shone unto many, yea, in some sort to our whole nation. We have noted these things, so that you might see their worth, and not negligently lose what your fathers have obtained with so much hardship. So, I'd like to tell you this, as you have your Thanksgiving celebrations with your families, to pass the message on that this second Thanksgiving with the Pilgrims, they had 5 kernels of corn to remember what they did before that first Thanksgiving. And that's what they all lived on. And this is a historical account. And it's something that you can find just as I have. So thinking about that though, that's what our founding fathers looked back to for the Christian foundation was the time of the Pilgrims. Of course, there's so much more, but that is a good summary of it. In closing, I'd like to say this, 1 Thessalonians 5:18. In everything, give thanks, for this is the will of God in Christ Jesus concerning you. Thank you very much.
That was a wonderful Thanksgiving presentation, wasn't it?
Yes.
And I learned so much from that, Peter, and thank you. We have a lot to be thankful for these days. We have a lot to be thankful for tonight, don't we? That we're able to be here together and enjoy this good time in Thanksgiving. At this time,